Okay, good evening and welcome. I'm looking forward to spending another semester with you. Business law was good. Business law was fun. So, yes, I'm sure company law is going to be equally successful. Thank you, Anisha. I missed you too. I did miss you too. I'm so glad to see all of your faces again. The bad news is that due to the large number of students that are in the regions, all our classes will be online. So Tuesdays will be online, even if it's the early class, it will be online as well. But what I will do is I will factor in some face-to-face classes. I don't want to completely lose that personal touch that we had, that personal connection that you only pick up when you are physically in each other's presence. Just seeing your avatars on Teams, you'll agree, isn't the same as actually being able to look you in the eyes. So classes then primarily online, but with the odd face-to-face class so that we can just keep in touch with each other. Okay, so company law and practice. Company law is not easy. It is not easy. You are going to have to stay with me. You are going to have to work with me the whole time, consistently. If there's something you don't understand, ask immediately so that I don't lose you. So today, by way of introduction, the study units, by the way, have all been uploaded on e-learning. I'm not sure whether the student support officers have already added you to e-learning. If not, you can also do self-enrollment. Self-enrollment key is the course code CLP 512S. Notes are there. I am arranging also to have hard copies of the study guide printed. So those will be available shortly. Okay, so today's class, let me share my screen. Today's lecture is very much so I just want to upload my slides. Just give me a second. I'm going to do units 1 and 2 today. Units 1 and 2, but they are very brief and they are really just by way of introduction. Just waiting for the slides. Okay, just give me a thumbs up quickly. Can you see the slides there? Okay. So Unit 1 is about the concept of legal personality, the juristic person. A company is a juristic person. In last semester's course, Introduction to Law, right at the beginning, you were introduced to the concept of a juristic person. We spoke about it again later in the semester when we were doing partnerships, where you learned that a partnership is not a juristic person. Partnership is a contractual agreement between persons where the individual partners remain liable for the debts of the business. A company, however, is a juristic person. Now, your accounting students, I'm sure you've all heard people talking about companies. We also very often misuse the word company. You'll talk about the company when you're referring to the business, but it might be some other type of company. First part of this semester, we are concentrating exclusively on companies. And then towards the end of the semester, we take a brief look at another type of juristic person, namely the close corporation. But the bulk of the work is based on companies. So your learning objectives, always not going to read all of them to you, but always remember when you are preparing for assessments to go back to your learning objectives and make sure that you have met them, that you can answer the questions posed in the learning objectives. So what is a juristic person? A juristic person is an entity which is said to have legal personality. The implication of this is that this entity, this business, is like a human being. It has legal capacity. It has the capacity to acquire rights and duties similar to any one of you, similar to a natural person. So just like you can own property, a company can own property. Companies can appoint employees. Coming with that comes the duty to pay these employees for their work. Company can own property. I've already mentioned that. Company can enter into a contract. When the company enters into the contract, it is the company that acquires the rights from that arise in terms of this contract, and is also liable for all duties that arise from this contract. So a juristic person An entity that has legal personality, the capacity to acquire rights and duties. It is like a human being, except that it is only these rights and duties are only for purposes of economic activity. So you cannot in all aspects equate a juristic person with a natural person, because although a juristic person can acquire rights and duties, these rights and duties are acquired for the purpose of economic activity. A company, a juristic person cannot perform acts that are inherently human. For example, it cannot get married. It also does not exist in a physical sense, which means the law of agency. Remember the law of agency. People, please, there's a very, very good reason why introduction to law was a prerequisite for company law. Because many of the concepts which you were introduced to in introduction to law will come back to haunt you now in company law. Here's the first one, the law of agency. So I hope you haven't thrown away your introduction to law notes, because you're going to have to refer back to them regularly to refresh your memories. A juristic person does not exist in a physical sense. It doesn't have hands and feet. It cannot talk. So in order to acquire these rights and duties, it must always be represented by agents. Exactly how that works is something we will do at a later stage. So how does an entity acquire legal personality? There are three ways in which an entity can acquire legal personality. Firstly, by way of a separate act, for example, the NUST Act, or the Namibia University of Science and Technology Act, or the University of Namibia Act, the Roads Authority, Transnamib, your state-owned enterprises in general. There is an act, literally an act of parliament, which says there will be a juristic person called the Namibia University of Science and Technology. But for private purposes, if Sydney, for example, wants to start a business, and he would prefer not to be a sole proprietor, but rather to have this business in the form of a juristic person, because there are many advantages about that, which we will still get to. He isn't going to approach Parliament to pass a law called Sydney Clark Company Act. So there's also general enabling legislation. Two pieces of legislation that are relevant here: the Companies Act 24 of 2004, which is the one that we'll be studying in detail this semester, as well as the Close Corporations Act. So those two separate acts of parliament set out the steps that a private individual must follow in order to create, so to speak, a juristic person. Steps you must follow to register your company. Getting back to that in a separate unit. And furthermore, if the purpose of the enterprise is not to make a personal profit, you can also establish a juristic person merely by behaving that way, by conduct. You remember when we started looking at partnerships, we learned that if the purpose of the entity is to make a profit and they are more than 20 people, they must register as a company. But if the purpose, the opposite also holds true. If it is a sports club, so the purpose is not to make a personal profit, they can merely get together. It's advisable to have a constitution, but it's not a legal requirement, and they merely conduct themselves as a juristic person. So those are the three ways in which an entity can acquire legal personality: by way of separate act, by way of general enabling legislation, and by way of conduct. Now, this concept, and people, please, I beg of you, you have to understand this. This concept of separate legal personality is integral to company law. The fundamental result of the entity having separate legal personality is that the corporate entity has the capacity to have its own rights and duties. The duties are the duties of the entity, not of the individual members. Let's say Simaneka, Lavinia, Brusa, and Sydney are the 4 shareholders of the company. The company enters into a contract with Limey, but the company has got financial problems and cannot pay Limey. Where can Limey get her money? Try to answer that. Shareholders are Samanika, Lavinia, Brusa, and Sydney. Company is ABC Pty Limited. ABC Pty Limited owes Rusa money. Rusa, where do you go to collect your money? Who can you hold responsible?
The company.
Sydney? Sydney, your hand is up. Try.
Yes. Yes. Just on the top of my head, due to the fact that the company is a separate legal entity, it has capacity on its own. So I think in terms of how she can get maybe her funds back, at the end of the day, the company must maybe sell its assets or to acquire any cash flow to pay her back or something like that.
Sydney, you are 100% correct. And sorry, Limey, but if the company doesn't have assets, you're not going to get your money. You're going to lose. Because you cannot claim your money from the individual shareholders. That is why they registered the company in the first place, is so that they cannot ultimately be held liable for the debts of the company. So what the way Sydney explained it there is very important that you understand that. Company goes bankrupt, not the shareholders. The company exists completely separately from the shareholders. Now, we don't normally do court cases at the level of law that I teach you, but there are 2 very important court cases that relate to the concept of separate legal personality. I've just got their names up there. I'm just going to tell you briefly the story of these court cases. They are very important with regard to the concepts in there. But you don't have to stress about them too much. You must understand the concepts. But I'm not going to ask you in test one to discuss Solomon versus Solomon in great detail. Solomon versus Solomon, that is the foundation of modern company law. Mr. Solomon was a shoe salesman. He sold shoes. Had a successful business selling shoes. So he decided to register a company called Solomon and Company Limited. So it was now a registered company. Mr. Solomon sold his very profitable shoe sales business to the company. The company's as a going concern. A company can buy another business. You all in the accounting profession, you should understand that. So the company owed him a lot of money. He was also the majority shareholder in this company. His sons had some few shares, but not very many. Bulk of the shares belonged to him, and the company owed him money. He was a clever man, so he made sure that this debt that the company owed him was secured, which means that if there was a demand for payment and all the creditors stand in line to get a little bit of money, your secured creditors get their money first. Company went on for a while, made money, etc., but eventually took an economic downturn, and despite his best efforts, Mr. Solomon could not keep this company going, and the company went bankrupt. So all the remaining assets were, as Sydney said, what should happen? Assets were liquidated. Assets were sold off to get a little bit of money. But because Mr. Solomon was a secured creditor, whatever little bit of money was raised, he would stand first in the line. The other creditors, which would not get anything, were unhappy about it and took him to court and said, no, how can he get the money? He must pay us. And the court ruling was that, the judgment of the court was that it doesn't matter how big his shareholding is. The company exists. Mr. Solomon is not the company. The company has an existence on its own. Therefore, the size of his shareholding is irrelevant. And his debts as secured creditor have to be paid. Please do read the notes. Other important court case, which also relates to the concept of a company existing apart from its members, is the matter of Dadu Limited versus Krugersdorp Municipal Council. Now, Dadu Limited versus Krugersdorp Municipal Council dates back from the bad old South African days of apartheid. Mr. Dadu and his co-shareholder, Mr. Dindar, were of Indian origin. They originally came from India, but settled in South Africa. Now, the Krugersdorp municipality, which was in what was at that time called Transvaal, had a municipal bylaw which stated that Asiatics. They referred to them as Asiatics at the time. So people coming from Indians, coming from the continent of Asia. Asiatics were not allowed to own land, property, within the borders of the Krugersdorp municipality. Dadu Limited, two shareholders, Mr. Dadu and Mr. Dindar, both Asiatics, bought property. And the old men that were in charge of this Krugersdorp Municipal Council near all fainted and went crazy. And how could this? And this is just, this cannot be allowed. We cannot have these Asiatics owning land in our town. And went to court to set the sale of the property aside. Long story short, the ruling was that a company does not have a nationality. The fact that Mr. Dadu and Mr. Dindar are Asiatics does not mean the company is Asiatic. Companies don't have a nationality. So they were ultimately allowed to own the property. So two important court cases there relating to the concept that the juristic person has a separate existence from its members. Consequences of separate legal personality. We have discussed this. I've mentioned all of these as I was going along. Profits of the corporation do not belong to the members, but to the company. Similarly, the liabilities of the corporation are not the liabilities of the individual members. It has perpetual succession. If Melissa and Alexandra start a company and subsequently decide they don't want to continue with the business and they sell the company to Natasha and Festus, the company continues even though the shareholders have changed. So it's not like a partnership where, remember with partnerships, you learned that any change in membership, the partnership will dissolve. Not like that with a company. There are companies in existence in Namibia that are probably about 100 years old. Initial shareholders long since passed on, but the company itself still exists. The assets of the corporation belongs to the corporation. So if Melissa and Alexandra have registered a company and the company buys the house, it does not mean that Melissa and Alexandra own a house. It's the company that owns the house, not the shareholders. There are, however, certain instances where certain circumstances arise where the separation, let's just go back. It acquires legal personality and exists apart from its members. So it is separate legal personality. But there are instances where this separation can be taken away. The company law terminology we use there is piercing the corporate veil. Remember, veil is when a woman gets married and she's got something over her face when she's brought into the church so that you can't see her. Now, piercing the corporate veil is like ripping it apart, so opening it up. Piercing the corporate veil, it's just terminology that we use, which means that the separateness is taken away. It is stripped of its legal personality, and it is no longer regarded as an entity with separate existence, which means if it's no longer separate, then the individuals comprising it can be held personally liable. But this is very, very, very rare. And it is really only used as a punitive measure where the separateness has been used as a device to cover fraud. There are certain instances where the legislator, the relevant acts, provide for personal liability, or alternatively, a creditor can get a court order holding certain individuals personally liable. If you were to look at the study guide, I give certain examples of this. Do not stress about those examples in Unit 1. In Unit 1, you must understand that the juristic person is separate, but there are some rare instances where there can be personal liability. Those instances of personal liability, as we progress with the semester, I will point out to you. I'll give you examples of this. Don't need to stress about those examples now, that you will not understand them. Okay, any questions? Any questions about Unit 1, about the concept of the juristic person? Monique, are you with us?
Yes, I am, ma'am.
Mrs. Namises, Emerentia, I'm glad to see you. Did you
Thank
understand
you,
that
Miss.
part? Did you understand that part?
The law is not really easy. One has to go back, read up, and come back with questions, Miss.
Okay, but that is what you must do. After every class, you have to go and read and come back with questions. But your main takeaway from Unit 1 is the company is separate from its members. Or Unit 1, I wasn't talking about companies specifically, I was talking about juristic persons. They are separate from, it's like Emerentia and Natasha are separate people. Natasha and Natasha Pty Limited are separate people. Okay, let's move on to Unit 2. It's not a very long unit, but I do want to do this as well. It follows from what we've just done. So in Unit 1, we were talking about the concept of the juristic person and legal personality in general. In Unit 2, we are now focusing, we are now zooming in specifically on companies. Okay, just give me a thumbs up quickly. Can you see the slides there? Great. Okay, so zooming in then specifically on companies. Your learning objectives, what define a company? What is a company? So what is a company? Now, the definition of a company in the Companies Act does not tell us what a company is. Companies Act describes in the definitions clause, defines a company as a company is a company incorporated under Chapter 4 of this Act and includes a company which before the Act was a company. So that tells you diddly squat about what a company is, gives you no explanation of what a company is. Layman's definition of what a company is. Company is an incorporated, another word for incorporated is registered. It's incorporated, it's registered. A registered association of persons with a common objective of acquiring gain, making a profit. This definition does not, however, apply to all companies because we also get a certain type of company that we will look at a later stage, known as non-profit associations. Churches, schools, etc., can register as companies, although their purpose is not acquiring personal gain. Either which way, important aspect of a company, it is registered. Partnerships were never registered. Companies are registered. We will look in a future unit at the process of registration. Two important, yes, Sydney? Sydney, you have your hand up?
Ma'am, I just want to ask, a body corporate, is it also a sort of an NGO company? Perhaps, I know a body corporate it falls under churches and all those churches, they're non-profit organizations. But does it mean that it can register under any form of business, like for a partnership, it can register as a partnership or a CC or a company?
Sydney, what do you mean by a body corporate? Are you referring to a body corporate in terms of the Sectional Titles Act? You're talking about property now.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure that I understand your question. No. Sydney, a body corporate does not register as a company or as a close corporation. A body corporate is established in terms of the Sectional Titles Act. Sectional Titles Act specifies that the moment you register a sectional title complex, there must be a body corporate. However, in terms of the Sectional Titles Act, the body corporate is a juristic person. It has legal personality. So the individual members of this body corporate, so the owners of the individual properties, are not personally liable for the debts of the body corporate.
The body corporate, okay.
Yeah. So no, just to summarize, and I like how you thinking further. Just to summarize, it has a body corporate in terms of the Close Corporations Act, is a juristic person. It has legal personality, but it derives its legal personality from the Sectional Titles Act. So if the body corporate has not paid the insurance, they can't come to you and say, the insurance company can't come to you and say, you must pay.
Yeah. Okay. No, I
So
understand that.
yeah, but no, it doesn't register as a company or a closed corporation. It is a juristic person, but a different type of juristic person.
100%, ma'am.
Okay, great. But keep the questions up. I'm enjoying your questions. Shows me you thinking a little bit wider than just what I put on the slides. Okay, so we've looked at that slide. What is a company? So what makes a company special? What distinguishes a company from a different type of juristic person? First of all, okay, a company is a juristic person. That's a very important characteristic of a company. But what makes a company special is this. This is unique to companies, and where companies differ from close corporations, is the separation between ownership and control. Companies have, how best to explain this? Two groups. There are two groups of people that are involved in a company. Firstly, on the one hand, there are the directors that are in charge of managing the company. And on the other hand, you have the shareholders who are the owners. So ownership, shareholders, control, directors. That is not to say that the same people cannot do both jobs, so to speak. By saying there is a separation between ownership and control, I am not saying that a shareholder may never be a director, or that a director may not be a shareholder. But it's like one person then sitting on two different chairs, wearing two different hats. The directors manage the company, the undertaking. The shareholders can exercise control by way of general meetings. We'll get to that in Unit 8. The shareholders appoint the directors. Sorry. This might puzzle you at the moment. Just remember it for the time being. There is a whole separate unit later in the study guide that deals with the separation between ownership and control. But it's important because it differs, for example, from a close corporation. In a close corporation, the members also manage the business. But take a large listed company like, say, Namibia Breweries, for example. It has, I don't know how many hundreds of shareholders. Those shareholders, if I buy shares, let's say I have some money that I want to invest. I decide I want to invest this money by buying shares in Namibia Breweries. That means I'm a part owner of Namibia Breweries. But that does not mean that I can tell them what type of beer to make. Separation between ownership and control. going to get back to this repeatedly as we go on, so it will all become more clear. Okay, so that's what I had planned for this evening. I do need to tell you, if you find company law, somebody's got, let's just mute. If you found this confusing, and I must almost tell you that the next couple of lectures are going to be confusing. But as we go on, everything will be, company law becomes easier the further you get into it. So if tonight's lecture was confusing, don't lose sleep over it. Don't give up. I'll share the notes on the WhatsApp group now quickly so that you can just, they are also on e-learning. Read through tonight's notes. If you do have any questions, please ask me next week on Tuesday at our next class. But don't despair, it gets easier. Sydney?
Ma'am, is there a course outline for this model?
Yes, there is. I will share the course outline just after this class as well.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
And then, just before I say good night, I see a few faces in the class of students that I know wrote the Introduction to Law Second Opportunity exam. I'm glad that you have joined and that you're not waiting for the results. Only thing I can say about the Second Opportunity exam is it was very, very obvious who attended the revision class or listened to the recording afterwards. I got some excellent results in the supplementary exam. People that I actually want to shout at, that if you could get 70% in the supplementary, why didn't you pass first time around? Why didn't you work harder? There were some very, very poor results. People that had obviously not bothered to prepare, but there were some excellent results as well. Very, very obviously those people that had attended the revision class and listened to the recordings. I have figured out now, I taught myself how to do this. I was very proud of myself, for an old boomer lady like myself, figured out how to put the recordings, the class recordings on YouTube, like I did with the revision class recording. So I will be doing that. It might be easier for you to download and access the recordings if they are on YouTube, and then I'll just share the necessary links. Okay, any last questions before we say goodnight?
Ma'am, sorry, just one last question.
Yes.
The supplementary scripts, will it be available to us?
No, exam scripts we do not give back to students.
Is it? Okay.
No.
No, it's fine.
Okay. Any further questions?
Ms. Anacom,
Yes, Natasha.
quickly before you go, you said the self-enrollment key is the code of the course.
Yes. CLP 512S.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Night, night, everybody. Meet again on Tuesday.
Good night,
Bye-bye.
ma'am.
Good
Bye.
night.
Bye.
Good night, Miss.
Night night.
Night, night.